The classic series and Battle Network games have an interesting relationship, the latter taking many of the characters from the former and remixing them to fit the setting. With some, you can see the resemblance, some are dead ringers, and others don't seem to share much more than the name. Regardless of that though, the Robot Masters from Classic were largely designed with a specific task in mind, and while managing to look pretty cool while doing so, you could say they were more function over fashion. Contrast that to Battle Network's NetNavis, which, while they do in many cases still have a specific purpose with matching abilities, seem to have appearance much more in mind when being designed. They're much more widespread and customizable after all, and who wants to show off a dumb-looking Navi when they partially serve as a representation of you? With that being the case, you'd expect the more modern version of each character to be the better looking one, but that's not always true. Well, at least not in my opinion. I'm not about to pretend that there's an objectively correct answer for which edition is prettier. I've been wanting to compare and contrast these guys for a while. I'll be organizing these lists by DLN and DWN numbers, grouping them together by game. I'm Wes, the Explosion, discussing each Robot Master and NetNavi's design, along with which one I have a preference for. I feel like I should be saving this one for last, but since I said I'd do it in number order, we have to start with Mega Man. So who takes it? Rock or Hub? Both of them have this thing going on where they're relatively generic, at least in the context of their full franchise. Mega Man Prime has the big dumb boots and wrist, and while EXE has a bit more going on, he still has the basic spandex looking suit, Navi symbol in the center of his chest, with pretty basic gloves and shoes, some light blue lines and yellow shoulder pads, and some sort of backpack thing behind him. Both have helmets as well, which are probably their most unique feature, but that's not saying too much. Mega Man has a blue one that encompasses all of his head other than his face, with the weird little ear things on the sides and the little rectangular bumps on the top center. It's not much in the way of flair, and I'm not sure if they serve much purpose. I did see one adaptation where the Mega Buster ran on solar power and he absorbed this with these bumps, though I could be thinking of Kashan again. Either that or I read an interpretation where the author was thinking of Kashan. Oh, and his buster is kinda basic too, but it does have a little yellow gauge on the side, and I've also seen a version where that kept track of his current energy level, which was neat. Moving on to EXE, he has a sort of bicycle helmet looking thing with yellow rectangles, possibly to connect him to the original, Navi symbols over his ears, and a few spikes of not quite hair coming out the back. And a bit of other flair, but still nothing too crazy. Both are, like I said, generic, and while this might cause it to sound like I'm criticizing both, I'm really not. While just about every other robot or Navi was created with a specific theme or function in mind, both of these guys have a lot of different hats to wear. If they had a single design feature that stood out too much, that could pigeonhole them into a specific role, and when they have to swap powers, the new ability might just not fit. Instead, each just kinda solidifies the basic design motifs for their series, and every other character is able to build upon these elements in ways that fit whatever they happen to be going for. And it's not just these Mega Men who do that. Mario and Sonic also aren't the most complex character models in their series, yet they still manage to establish their styles and be distinct, so I'd say the more basic central hero thing is a winning formula. Now, going back to our two subjects, another thing to consider here is the different forms each have. Mega Man Classic swaps palettes as he swaps powers, and he also has the rush adapters that completely change him up. EXE though has style changes, double souls, crosses, beast out, cross fusion, and probably some other stuff I'm forgetting about. If we based it on these, he would win hands down. Then again, Megs gets some pretty nice costume changes in 11, so maybe this isn't as simple as I first thought. I'm not going to go through and discuss each transformation since that'd take too long, plus each of these are temporary, whereas the basic forms are the face of the franchise and what makes it on all the box art, so that's what we're going to base this round on. If we go back to their primary forms, Battle Network is definitely more detailed. Of course, he was designed for the Game Boy Advance, whereas the original was NES, which had a lot more limitations, and you know what? Two can play at that game. 11 has a few little touches added in, and then there's my favorite iteration, Smash Bros, where they add seams in his armor, especially where his buster splits to allow for different attacks, and different textures and slight color variations on stuff like his gloves and joints. I've been playing Classic for a lot longer, so while this may be nostalgia bias, I think 11 probably takes it, and the Smash Bros. Version totally clinches it for the original. Plus, Classic Mega Man is also smaller and cuter, so bonus points for that. With Roll, things are at least a little easier. Don't get me wrong, both are cute. The original sprite leaves a lot to be desired, her having the appearance of a soulless doll, but later games have her looking a lot better. For the most part, she just looks like a little blonde girl, her hair tied back with a green ribbon, and just a very straightforward red dress and shoes. This is probably the most basic design we'll look at today, but I don't really think it's a bad thing. For one, she is adorable, whereas a lot of little extras might diminish this, maybe even take her closer to the cool category. Plus, it serves as a really nice contrast when they put her in fighting games like the vs. Capcom, and this unassuming little miss starts smacking around muscle-bound toughies like it's nothing. On top of that, she also has a few costume changes that further add to her charm. Unlike Mega Man, who can change forms to give himself specific powers for a limited time, Roll has a few different outfits that she keeps through full games, so I'm going to actually count them here. There's this little number that she has innate that gives her sleeves and a bit more color, the black and white really going well with her typical red. And while she's still obviously a child, it also makes her look a little older, and I do like the trope of seeing characters grow, even if this is likely mostly in my head. The one from 11's a bit of a middle ground, her ditching the sleeves again but retaining the black and white. While all of them suit her really well and I appreciate them letting her change things up, I'd like it even more if she were playable a bit more often. Moving on to Roll EXE, she's still really cute, but I'm also very confused with a lot of her design. They went with the more obvious pink this time around, which is fine, but red's always been more Roll's color. The majority of the Navis also aren't allowed to have hair, so she gets a helmet with a big ol' flap of yellow spilling out from the back that takes its place, which isn't horrible, but it feels like they could have made her one of the exceptions and just let her keep her locks. Why should Search Man get all the fun and conditioner? Her little antennae are kind of interesting though. In resting position, they kind of look like some sort of tool for binding wires together, good for cable management, and they can do interesting things like lash out at enemies, as well as touch data streams to download information in the anime. Looking at her from behind though is when things get really weird. On her back, she has this black rectangle thing which I'm not sure what to make of. I bet somebody more familiar with computers could tell me what it's supposed to be though. Where I'm even more perplexed is this weird little plug thing at the base of her back. About the only thing the position makes me think of is where the tail typically is on a Playboy bunny costume, and come to think of it, her antennae could also be likened to rabbit ears, but I might just look at a few too many high-end anime figures. Given how young these characters are supposed to be, I was originally going to just gloss over this since it felt really weird to talk about, but when I looked at the official complete works, the designer said that he originally meant for Roll.exe to have more sex appeal, but the director told him to pull back. It makes me kinda wonder if what I'm perceiving as possible bunny bits could be left over from this. Between that and a few other details that feel kind of unnecessary, EXE just feels a little over-designed, on top of weird. While I'd say both versions are cute, with Roll EXE, there'd be a bit more of a confused question mark at the end of the statement, so the DLN takes this round. Cut Man. Cut Man. Cut Man, Cut Man, Cut Man. My beautiful boy, my handsome lad. He's so perfect that all Battle Network changed was to make him even more Cut Man. Put him down as a dead ringer. Original Cut Man was my favorite, largely because of Ruby Spears, but my love for him has evolved beyond his weird puppet mouth and Igor accent. The weird thing is, I should not like him at all, based on my normal standards. I tend to like cool colors over warmer ones, so the orange should be a turnoff, plus white tends to look a little too plain. On top of that, I always found it weird how the vast majority of the Robot Masters are androids that could pass as humans in armor, but Cutman clearly does not. His weapon is also super silly, a lumberjack that, rather than an axe, wears a pair of scissors on his head like a bow or cat ears, like some kind of gamer girl, and yet it somehow just works. Do all these points against them just collapse in on themselves and become a coolness singularity, or do I really not hate the inhuman part and the other two negatives multiply into a positive? Who knows, but I frickin' love this guy, and if I ever had a son, I would name him after Cutman. As for individual designs, his original sprite is pretty lacking, but concept art and later appearances have him looking simple and sleek, despite the ridiculous head ornament. While he's sometimes depicted as being childlike, I think he's just on the shorter side, but either way, his diminutiveness makes him super cute. As for the Net Navi, he's largely the same but with a more serious expression, reminiscent of the original's original sprite. Is a bit sleeker, especially with his boots and gloves, though he does still have some rings around the ends to give them some bulk, as well as some extra gray in his color palette. And we can't forget the C on his chest, really driving home just who the guy is. Plus, he keeps 2 fingers extended, either open or closed like scissors, or maybe even to look like ninja hand signs, given his connection to Shadow Man. The little details are just really nice on this guy. Plus, I'm also the sort to like contrast, and I really like how, despite being pretty silly in appearance, he carries himself so seriously and has such a grim function in the game. Not that I'm counting character traits, but EXE already wins this round, so it's a fun thing to mention. And as another bonus, in the anime, he has several brothers, so we get extra versions of him, which is fun and almost makes up for the fact that they kill him off pretty much immediately. Going back to the topic at hand though, while Cutman may be perfect, Cutman EXE is perfecter. Outside of Mega Man, Gutsman might be the most emblematic character for both series. I'm sure a few of the recurring cast might try to challenge him for that title though. Not only is the original Gutsman in the original title, he's also one of the main villains in the cartoon with Cutman, but even in the games, the guy keeps coming back. He's in the arcade titles, Wily has his Guts tank, and he uses an altered version of Gutsman for a fortress boss in 7. Besides these obvious connections, his influence is apparent in several other enemies, from Stone Man and Concrete Man, as well as his little illegitimate children in Mega Man 8. Gutsman EXE fills a similar role, being the Navi of the protagonist's early game rival, appearing in most entries as a boss, and he appears in the anime quite frequently to make Mega Man look good. They should probably be a bit nicer to the guy. Anyway, point is, both versions get pretty juicy roles, so this one's worth putting a bit of extra thought into. So let's give the original a look. He's definitely one of those designed with function in mind. He's a big guy meant to pick things up and put them down. Since throwing both his weight and boulders around is his method of fighting, he doesn't have any extra weapons or accessories, but is a pretty simple design. That's not to say he doesn't have anything going on though. While not exactly the same as the construction helmets that the Mets wear, it does have some similarities, from the yellow coloration to the stripe that runs around it, tying him in not just to his stage enemies, but also his original function. Likewise, his jaw looks more like a shovel, kinda like the one you'd see on a backhoe. He's got a nice color scheme, largely warm colors with the red and yellow, which contrasts nicely with the black on his chest. For some nice extra details, he has a pair of jewels on his helmet and chest. Look at his Net Navi equivalent and you can definitely see the resemblance. If Stone and Concrete looked like his cousins, I'd say this would be his younger brother, and as such, we see recurring elements, like his jawline, beefy arms, and color scheme. He loses the general construction theme with his more squarish helmet, but adds in extra elements, like what looks like bolts or some other kind of connectors in his gauntlets and shoes, and that second thing also being pretty flat, which probably helps with balance. He has a pair of tanks on his back which contain... I have no idea. Probably just thrown in for some extra flair. Both of them are really good designs and get across the point of the character. Big guys built for raw power. As for which is better? Robot Master, I like the color distribution, how he fits the construction worker image more, and his better posture. Not sure why EXE hunches forward so much. As for the Navi, his design has some nice little details in there to really make him stand out. Plus, his set of weapons is cooler. I really appreciate how the original doesn't need anything fancy, he'll just toss whatever's on hand at you. But I like the Guts Punch and Guts Hammer the newer version employs more. Then again, I'm sure Gutsman could punch your teeth in if he wanted to. He's probably either being smart or lazy using his range, so maybe I shouldn't count the fist in EXE's favor. It's really close, I'd say I'd like the original just a tad bit more. For the meme though, we can pretend I'm giving it to him just because of that sweet ass. The Icemen are another set of take your sibling to work day, both being tiny guys in blue winter wear. The original is pretty basic, having that dark blue parka with the white fur and accessories, as well as very little of his face visible outside of his massive cute eyes. Or a really doofy expression if we look at early art. There's a few small details to mark him as a robot, such as his belt looking like it's bolted on, his bulky gloves and boots, and if you get the right angle, whatever the heck's going on with the bottom of his feet, but for the most part, it'd be easy to confuse him with just a regular guy exploring the Arctic. Still though, there is something pleasing about white on that shade of blue, and while the design is simple, it does get the point across. Iceman EXE seems to take this even further. Rather than the cliche cartoony parka and the arms and legs typical of a robot master, he looks even more like a regular person, having what looks like a more modern winter coat with mittens and boots that look more realistic. If you told me this wasn't Iceman but his operator, well, if it wasn't for his Navi symbol, I'd believe you. Some ops still wear those, come to think of it though. While it might seem weird to have a strong preference here given how similar they look, I'd give this to the original for 3 reasons. First, I just like a shade of blue more. Petty, I know, but this is a beauty contest. Second, while subtle, I do like that you can tell he's a robot by looking more easily than you can tell that his doppelganger's a Navi. And third, in some shots, EXE's face looks swollen, and since I'm not a fan of children in distress, I feel a little bad for him, even if it is just in my head. A shame I can't give him bonus points for non-visual elements, because I love his voice casting in the anime. The Japanese has him sounding like you'd expect, high-pitched and cutesy, like a child.
Kinda like this, Desu.
Then the English dub turns around and does the complete opposite, him sounding like he's been smoking 2 packs a day for years, and it's really funny.
It reminds me of that baby from Who Framed Roger Rabbit. Ah yes, Ugg and Uglier. I mean DLN6 and Bombman EXE. I don't like either of these guys, and I don't think I've made it a secret. You can tell these two are the same person due to their mohawks and bombs. The RM's round, his center being a big black ball like cartoon bombs, which is clever, but it gives him really weird proportions, which looks even weirder with the stance he takes. Seriously, he looks like he's always halfway squatting. And while orange is a pretty hard sell for me color-wise, yellow is even more so. Overall, while it's hard to put my finger on, most of my reasons being pretty petty and not the sort of thing I'd hold against really anyone else, I just do not like this guy. EXE, on the other hand, looks not horrible, but not great either. He reminds me of an action figure, but of a grunt character. He's not Darth Vader, he's not Boba Fett, he's not Luke Skywalker or Han Solo, he's the Stormtrooper. That might explain why Wily makes a bunch of dupes of him in the anime though. If he were an action figure, I'd only pick him up if I were completing a collection, but he's still better than OG Bomb-Man, so that's another point for Battle Network. If I couldn't have given it to Ruby Spears, I would, but that beak ain't canon. Moving on to Fireman and Fireman.exe. The original has always struck me as a little weird, looking like he just escaped from some sort of evil torture dungeon. While there are plenty of robot masters with no hands, most of them give me the impression that they could have a pair tucked away in whatever weapon they have instead, you know, like putting your arm in a Pringles can. With Fireman, they just seem chopped off, though that could just be a me thing. It might have something to do with his lack of hands being paired with his helmet having that little patch of metal covering up his mouth, like some sort of muzzle, so it just seems like the guy's been through some things. While newer official art doesn't look bad and his color scheme and shoulder pads are kinda neat, that just makes me go from being creeped out by the RM to being pretty okay with him. The Net Navi, on the other hand, looks so good. The big thing is his head, which looks like a factory smokestack. It gives him such a sinister look, with not smoke coming out of the top, but actual flames rising that high. I just imagine if his head was an actual part of a facility, it would be a place belonging to a merchant of death to manufacture illegal guns to mow down orphan puppies in impoverished third world countries. In addition to that, his flamethrower hands are a lot more stylized, not being just generic busters with a wider opening, but powerful looking cylinders with multiple colors and vents near the edge that let you see the flames burning inside. His rectangular shoulders remind me of something, but I can't quite place what. Though they're cool regardless, and the minimal inclusion of blue into his previous color scheme draws some extra attention to his weapons and boots. EXE's design is just largely the same as the original, but more, sanding off the more generic bits and perfecting details to make him stand out. As is probably obvious, Battle Network wins this round and is probably the easiest decision in this video. Oh boy, the Elec Man. Two bosses that I really like, but for very different reasons. DLN-08 looks like a comic book character, and if Mega Man had never existed and he showed up in one of them as a superhero or villain, I'd think he'd fit right in. The majority of his skin is covered by a costume that doesn't give away too much of his build. His suit has a lot of prominent black, which makes the yellow and red stand out all the more in contrast. Like how the bolt of electricity coming off his mask and symbol on his chest look like lightning on a dark night sky. He'd make a really great action figure. The NetNavi version looks a lot nastier, and while he could probably kick it in a comic, it would definitely be as a bad guy. He has a grayish, expressionless face with a lightning bolt under each eye like a tear. He's also dipped more heavily into the yellow and black color scheme, with some grays thrown in, really doubling down on the stormy night sky thing, now with storm clouds. He's also got that big dumb symbol on his head, as well as whatever we call that Dragon Shield-esque type of chest piece that the original had as well. The most interesting parts of him though are his hands and backpack. While sometimes silver and sometimes gold, Elec Man EXE's gloves have these somewhat pointed tips at the end, which look like they'd be good at working on circuit boards and maybe other electronics. Then, on his back, he has these weird power transformer looking things that the wiki tells me are called lightning arresters. Pointing out in 4 directions, he uses these to channel and store electricity, and it does a good job of showing what he's about beyond just giving him a lightning symbol. Like Guts Man, this is really close, and like Guts Man, I have to pick a favorite, but this time I'm going Battle Network. The fingertips help a little, but it's that powerline equipment behind him that really puts him over the top. And as a bonus, we have Dr. Light and Dr. Hikari. Original Light is a kindly old man, reminiscent of Santa Claus, who just wants people to be nice to each other, and that carries in his gentle demeanor. And Tadashi Hikari doesn't show up very often in the Battle Network games, typically only in flashbacks, so he's a bit harder to pin down. This is him in the anime, right before he makes a questionable decision. This is some unofficial art where he's wearing a Hawaiian shirt. And this, as near as I can tell, is his actual official art. He looks a bit sleepier and still pretty close to Santa Claus, just a different interpretation. While that unofficial art does tempt me, I still think I'd give it to the original, since he's a bit more consistent in appearance and because I prefer the more friendly and welcoming looking version, as opposed to the one that looks ready for bed. And just for fun, let's compare younger versions. Here's Light in Mega Man 11's flashback, and here's concept art for young Hikari. Both look like generic NPCs. Maybe I should have just left it at their primary appearances, but oh well, even with this, I'd still take the original. Battle Network looks way too goofy, and Classic looks like he might at least get a name, maybe if he's lucky. I know he's just a regular guy that's just really smart, so maybe I should expect this, but at least Albert looks kinda cool back then. Huh. With Dr. Light thrown in, Classic is winning, 5-4, though they were even until overtime. Was really not expecting that. As we go along, I'm sure we'll start to see more of a gap, and depending on which way it goes, people will be able to accuse me of either nostalgia or blasphemy. But regardless of the direction, remember, this is just my preferences. This is pretty subjective, so I'd love to hear other people's scores and specifics, if anyone would like to indulge me. I'll be continuing with these as I get through more Battle Network games and get more footage as I do, but for right now, thanks for watching, and maybe consider subscribing if you like Mega Man content. Something, something, something for everlasting peace.